Hello and welcome to episode 19 of The Actual Magicians. Yes, I am an Actual Magician's bookshelf, where today I'm going to be covering the meaning of the Lenormand cards and a brief bit of history on them, although I've done that in other videos. This I just wanted to stick straight to the meanings of the cards, get right into it. Hopefully do it as one take so I don't have to edit it because I'll be away from my computer for a week. And we're going to look at the Cyberpunk Lenormand, but these are the meanings that relate to the original Lenormand or any other Lenormand that you have. And it was 1799 that the Game of Hope came around, and it was a parlour game. It had very few instructions. It was a little race game used by laying out the cards, but it also had the playing cards, French and German playing cards, so that you could play piquet with it. And one imagines that at the time in Germany, it was frowned upon to gamble, certainly. And so this was a parlour game that could be played with the kids. And then when they'd all gone to bed, the adults could use it to play actual gambling games and so forth. That's my take on it anyway. Now, the Game of Hope has symbols like the cloud, the ship, the star, the coffin, and so forth. These are the original Lenormand from the British Museum. And the meanings of the cards, just give me 1 second. When we first produced the first mainstream published book on English on the Lenormand, we'd done our research. We did it with fairly contemporary authors like Trepner in German, but also we went back and we looked at another German, Justin, I think that was around the turn of the century, 2000, 2004, and sometime in the 80s, 86, I think this one, 89, this one in French as well. So we went back to Portuguese, French, German, Dutch authors to see what they were doing. And one interesting thing that just came to me while I was looking back through these books from our research was that a lot of them do have, as one imagines from the 80s onwards, a very psychological twist to them, interpretation to them. And so this idea that a lot of more contemporary US English authors, teachers, readers have of it being a down-to-earth oracle, it's not used for complex, mystical, magical, highfalutin psychological readings, is nonsense, absolute nonsense. Even way back when it was being used like that, and there's a reason for that, and I'll come on to that shortly. The actual research, though, was mainly with coffee ground reading. So, for example, here we have the bridge as a reading in coffee grounds, and this is where the extra cards come from in the Cyberpunk Lenormand, the bridge. And we can find most of the cards in the Lenormand in coffee ground readings. I'm just trying to find one. So, for example, dog over here. Loyalty, friendship, trust, your actual dog, if you have a dog, the dog card there. And it was actually Mary K. Greer who was doing some online research. She noticed there was a book in the British Museum called The Games of Germany, the Amusement de l'Allemande or something, and Charlie Goodwin and I went down to the museum to check it out. We were working with Mary, we opened it up, and there it was in, for the first time ever, printed evidence that these cards in this book, which have the cards inserted into it with interpretations in English, was actually based on the reading of coffee grounds. And the reading of coffee grounds comes from our reading of dream interpretation. I'm just going to put these books down. And so these symbols are actually from dream interpretation via the reading of sherbet, coffee grounds, tea leaves, into cards, into a game, into then having Mademoiselle Lenormand's name fastened onto them 5-10 years after she died, as if she'd actually used these cards when she hadn't used the Lenormand cards at all. They have her name, but she likely used a PK deck, like it was recorded. Casanova, for example, had readings in one of his journals, diaries, whatever, but there's mention of readings by laying out the cards, and he was fairly shocked because the woman that was reading the cards suddenly realised that all of the different court cards were Casanova's different lovers and so on. So she could see all of this in the cards, and he was quite taken aback by that. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the meanings of the cards, and this is the Cyberpunk deck that we have just finished fulfilling the Kickstarter for and sending them all out, so it's now in print, and it comes with a keyword version and a non-keyword version and a little book with the keywords written into it that we're going to take a look at now. But again, these apply to everything, and I say I'm hoping to do this in 2 parts. Cards 1 to 18, which is the dog that we've just looked at. I'm just going to walk us through and maybe comment a little bit on why these meanings, why I think they're these meanings, and how you can apply them perhaps in a contemporary reading. So we start with the messenger, and here we have news. Let me turn that around so that you can see it. Oh, I hold it. We have news, restitution, novelty, surprise, favour, and help from a distance. Now, help from a distance is part of a reinterpretation of, in the coffee ground cards, and then into Lenormand. What happened was, because they were using the meanings from the reading of coffee grounds, which are in the bottom of a cup, sometimes the coffee grounds wouldn't be clear. It wouldn't be clearly a dog shape. It might look like a dog shape, but be a bit misty, a bit scattered. I can't remember how they referred to it. Something like just unclear or scattered, something like that. And so when Lenormand cards became cards, and then you were still trying to put that meaning, like if a dog image is clear or scattered, then quite often in Lenormand it became if the dog is close to the sitter's card, or if the dog is close to another card, or one side of the cloud is darker than the other. So that gives you, on this side it means it's clear, on this side it means it's not clear. A similar thing happened with distance, because the symbols in coffee cups and tea leaf reading differ depending on whether they're at the bottom of the cup, the side of the cup, or at the top of the cup. It's really important, because that's when all of these people now talking about Lenormand are getting this idea of, oh, I do readings with distance, as if it's something sort of intrinsic into Lenormand. And so, for example, a bear close to your card might be worse than a bear far away from your card. But that's basically the interpretation of that has come, again, from having to transpose coffee ground reading into cards that are sat on a table. And that's all. That's where it actually comes from. So distance, clarity, I was just trying to remember the word again now. I think it's scattered or something like that, has come into Lenormand as distance. So help from a distance is a meaning of the rider or the messenger, as I've called them, and that we've got a motorbike messenger in a sort of cyberpunk style to show that they're bringing something, that it is something from a distance. Restitution is interesting because I chose that word as a more contemporary word for things like a will, a legacy, an inheritance, because the Lenormand, because of its time, is full of meanings like that really have very little direct meaning in contemporary society. So restitution, a return of something that you thought was lost or might have been taken away from you, is why I put restitution on that card. And things like novelty and surprise are more verbs, adjectives, nouns. I tried to mix the language up a little bit on each card so that no matter how it appears in context, you have some keyword to join with the other card. So you might choose a noun off one, an adjective off one, a verb off another, or an adverb off another, and that will make you a nice, clear Lenormand sentence. So that's, again, why I've chosen usually 4 or 5 keywords. There's a little bit of a traditional in there, there's a little bit of a rewording, there's a little bit of the authentic meaning from coffee grounds, and I've tried to put them all in as few words as possible. If you want a good book on all of that, then our little book 7-Day Lenormand, under our pen name Tolly Goodwin and I, of Andrea Green, and I'll put a picture down, let's see if I can do it this way, down here, if I get time to edit this, is basically my handbook from all of our research notes of the sort of meaning that we get from the coffee cards, the meaning that we've got on the Philippe sheet, the meaning that we've got in the game of hope as to whether it's a good or bad thing in the game, which shows the sort of response to those symbols as would be common to anyone playing that game, and therefore meaningful as an interpretation, and then contemporary meanings that we've derived from all of the French, German sources and so forth. And don't let people tell you that there's a Dutch tradition, that there's a French tradition, or I read in the German tradition, and so on, because if you read all of the German books, then they're all equally different to each other, as all of the tarot books are different to each other. There's really no such thing as a tradition, and I defy anyone to show me a real tradition that you can demonstrate has been handed from one source to another down a line. It's funny when you see traditional meanings and you know which book they've come from, or you know which sort of dream oracle that they've actually drawn that interpretation and word from. Just pulling up the chair there. So that's the messenger news. Basically something new, novel, surprising. Clover, we have a little luck, fortune, small gains, minor success, and undisturbed happiness, because that allows the clover to grow. The clover field is as it is, and I've got a sort of agro version, a sort of agrarian farm version of the clover, perhaps being cloned or something in the picture to show that it's a little bit, but it can add up, over time. The ship, of course, becomes more of a futuristic spaceship design. And this really, back in the day, there was no such thing as really leisure travel in one sense, perhaps for people doing the Grand Tour or something, but mainly the ship was connected with commerce, travel, risk, adventure, and movement. So the sense of the ship is distance, getting a distance, going abroad, travelling, that sort of thing. But it's always with risk, and that's why it's a cargo vessel setting off to the colony planets, perhaps. It's going to be a big risk. It might be worth it. You don't know unless you look at the rest of the reading. But the ship itself is that risk, is that adventurous step, is that distance, is that movement that you're taking place. The house is one of the nice clear literal symbols. So I've done a house with lots of different rooms in it, lots of different levels. Let's turn that around. Home, security, a visit to your house, and also a change for the better. The house is a positive card, and some cards in Lenormand are positive, some are negative. Again, derived from the meanings of coffee grounds. Some cards are, some dream images are really dangerous or negative, evil, you might say, back in the day. And therefore that has come across to the cards as well. The tree, and I've got this supporting, being supported, and also sheltering as well, which is a function of the tree. And this is mainly health, time, roots, lineage, survival, reward for effort, and support, which is why I've got it supported here. And it's supporting things going on inside it. And these are very old traditional meanings of the tree image as it might be in dreams, which is the oldest oracle that we have, the oldest divinatory tool. We open our eyes in the morning in our cave and suddenly thought we'd had these images. So perhaps the herd of animals that we were hunting would be found by the river because we dreamt of a river. Sure enough, they're there. And then we start to divine from those symbols. And so the Lenormand is fascinating because really, underneath the hood, it's the oldest form of divination that humanity has. And it got transposed into a game, cobbled off with somebody's famous name, sold as a real divination system, and it's managed to pass through the most unlikely of hands to preserve a very, very, the oldest form of human divination common to all cultures, all history through humanity. So the cloud, and again, I've done a bright side of this and a dark side of this for those that want to read there. I've got the lighting. It took ages to get this one exactly as I wanted it. And we can see that it's obscuring things, so it's uncertainty, misfortune, change, anxiety, and disorientation. We get lost in the clouds, and that's what that card really is. And perhaps I'll show you a quick 3-card reading, show how these fasten up together once we've done this particular recording. So the snake, again, the cards were done from a Christian background. So the cross, the snake, the garden have the requisite Christian connotations. But the snake is deceit, enmity, treachery, betrayal, danger, and misfortune. So again, the snake is a bad card. It's a bad card. The coffin, similarly, I've got a cyberpunk Egyptian style coffin here, but with the light coming down into it, or perhaps rising out of it, to show that that's a possible legacy. It's an end, finality, certain stop, loss. This is basically the period, the full stop in the deck. This means wherever you got to in that reading, that's it then. You don't read any further beyond that point. The bouquet, which is why Tali and I originally wanted to promote the Lenormand deck, because it had a rose in the bouquet and a key, and we needed a rose key in a deck, and this was the deck we found for it. We hadn't realised that we were looking for a tarot deck that had a rose and a key in it to make sure that no one had done that yet. And then we found that there was a rose, in effect the bouquet, and a key in this deck, and that's why we wanted to popularise it in the first place. Gift, appreciation. I think this is an early deck because it's got a misspelling there, I think. Fruitful returns, benefits from learning. So this is a reward, basically. This is a reward card. The scythe, And here we've got a modern take on farming with a massive scythe, scything the fields here. The drones following it. Patience, timing, waiting, caution, cutting, clearing, due harvest. Again, we're going back to 1799, 1800 with the original Game of Hope cards. So it was basically an agricultural society. So the scythe would have had a very clear meaning to most people. Although J.K. Hechtel himself, who did the Game of Hope and a couple of other games, and he died the year after the Game of Hope actually came out. So the publishers 50 years later were using a dead woman's name on a dead man's deck in order to make a quick buck. So, plus ça change, nothing changes. So, what was I saying? So he actually worked in a brass factory. I think his family owned it. He was the foreman or manager of a brass factory. And Nuremberg, I think it was, I might be wrong about that, I think had a very, it was famous at the time for two things. One was games, hence the Game of Hope, and why it was worth publishing a game there. And the other was musical instruments, brass instruments, and that's what Hechtel was working at in a brass factory. The whip, which again, back in the day, is about conflict, arguments, difference, domestic dispute, retribution. And this is a difference between hierarchies, between people who think that they're in charge and people who are being told what to do. It's dispute generally. So we have a sort of famous cyber whip there, mainly from the game and the anime. The birds, one of my favourite cards in the deck, which is basically Twitter these days. What have we got here? We've got brief hardship, uncertain position, distraction, idle communication, and noise. The birds are a mixed card. There are some slightly mixed cards because the birds can be really informative. They can bring you news, but also they can be very distracting. They can take things away from the table that you might want on the table. They can be a bit annoying and so forth. So that's why it's a brief distraction as well. The child is basically the child and everything connected with that. Innocence, good company, an undeveloped concept because it's innocent, it's new, it's too young perhaps. Kindness, enthusiasm, all bound by the child card. The fox looks down the alleyway and instead of rubbish is seeing gold. Really wanted to get that sort of image. And it's in the alleyways, not being seen from this side, and it's smog above, so he has the whole place to himself because he is cunning, sly, self-sufficient, possibly a manipulator. So there is a sense of following your own aims, trying to get your own way and so forth. The fox is, depending on who it is good or bad in a reading. The bear, I quite like that one. And it's a sort of bear that is made up of lots of different parts because the bear is one of the more complex symbols, I guess. But actually it's about influence, power, authority, the use of force. In the time that the Lenormand was developed, the Game of Hope cards were developed, there were, in Germany of the time, a lot of stories about Reynard the Fox. And Reynard the Fox, the popular thing with the stories was always that he would outsmart the bear. And the bear was easily a pastiche, a parody, a very negative one of government officials, the church, the landowners and things like that. The bear was often depicted as being slow, clumsy and always outwitted by the fox, who obviously the common people would have their protagonist as the fox. So the bear is really about sort of the opposite to the fox. The bear is more about organisation, control, power. And then, because of the connection with a mother bear protecting its cubs and so forth, it comes to represent the mother as well in symbolism. Now, I don't have the mother as a symbol on this because I prefer to leave that more open in the rest of the reading if you're going to identify certain people. And then people have real difficulties with it as well because they try and find who the mother might be in their business situation. And it isn't a mother or mothering figure, it's a boss, someone who is brusque and uses their authority and so forth. So I have kept that word deliberately off that particular card. The star card, again, we mustn't confuse it with the tarot cards because the star was used at the time for direction, navigation, finding your role, vision, good fortune ahead. So the star, like the clover, like the sun, is a good luck card, but the star is mainly you setting your sights on something and finding your way by it. It's a navigation aid, like a compass, which I've tried to build into the design somewhat, and that is what is going to set your course, but not necessarily mean it will come to fruition and so forth. Have to remember when these meanings were being derived and codified as to the context, the cultural, historical context of the time. The stork, again, in Germany, there's some nice German folk tales about the stork, particularly the stork and the frog. This one is quite abstract, but I wanted the movement of it, the energy of it, more than necessarily it being artistically pure. So delivery, return, birth, remembrance, earlier times. Habit. Yes, I was trying to remember what that word was. It's habit of going back, because again, the stork is well known for returning to its roosting place, its nesting place. I remember as a child reading Stork's Insurer, I think, where they put the wheels on top of the houses. I hope that's not a spoiler, for the storks to nest on because of the pointed roofs and so forth. And the storks are well known for coming back. Also, there's that sense of bringing a birth with them. But again, we've got the more direct meanings in there, including birth, return, delivery, habit at a personal level. Again, with the keywords, I'm trying to make some more general, some more personal, so you can always find the right word to fit in with your reading. Then finally, for this section, we have the dog, and we've seen that before. I wanted him on a boundary here. This is faithful, friend, closeness, protection, territory, and trust. I wanted this idea of boundaries with this because that can be very effective in a reading when someone needs boundaries. Quite often, you need to know where that person needs to set a boundary and the way in which they need to do it. So I wanted the dog, even though it's a faithful friend, it can be a close friend and so forth. Personally, if that doesn't apply, it's about territory and guarding your territory, setting your limits. And as a reader with 40 years experience, I know I want something in my deck that is going to show me that if it's relevant. So that's why I've leaned more into the protection and territory in the image, the boundary, more than, oh, it's just a close friend or something like that. So let's just take a quick look at how we might read 3 cards. We just read them as a story. So there's a conflict because you're trying to set a boundary with a close friend, and you really do need to cut through all of the chatter about it, particularly other people's opinions, and talk it out amongst yourself. And that's it. That's how you do a Lenormand reading. You just keep it literal, simple, straight. And you can imagine a whip being applied to a dog and the birds getting up in arms about it, up in wings about it perhaps. And so we can take the literal imagery as well as the cyberpunk imagery that's intrinsic to this deck. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series. How long is this recording so far? Just tell me somewhere, 30 minutes. That's excellent. I wanted 2 30-minute parts, so we're bang on time post-editing. And so I hope this has brought you some new information with the Lenormand cards themselves. And in the second part next week, we'll take a look starting at the tower, and I'll just start to rattle through them because then we're going to cover some of the extra cards that are in the Cyberpunk Lenormand as well. And Tali Goodwin advised Shiro for his extra cards, and he chose some of the ones we recommended with our recommended meanings for them. And Tali actually got those images from lottery cards, lottery layouts, because that's another source of these sorts of games, is in early lottery cards as well. And also games of Goose, where you have a racetrack game. There are several games like that we covered in our research that have particular cards like the Well, which is a card I really wanted in a deck. Shiro chose not to use the Well or some of the others because he wanted a particular set, which is great. But when I had the chance to do the Cyberpunk Lenormand, I immediately put a Well, or a similar card to the Well, in it. And also the Crown as well. I love the idea of a crown as a symbol. Again, that came from a race game back in our research. And any of those sets of images could have been chosen by that publisher to cobble together as Mademoiselle Lenormand's, Mademoiselle Lenormand, I think, actual real reading cartomancy deck. But it just happened to be the Game of Hope, but it could have been several others. And the coffee cards, interestingly, are very similar to the Game of Hope, but they have some interesting differences. They have a beast card, which is like a lion. They have 2 forms of tree card. One is more of a cultivator tree, one is more of a wild tree, and a few others that are slightly different. And again, I sort of brought all of that research into the Cyberpunk Lenormand to make it. What this deck is I tried to get the original sources, the historic sources, all of the authentic different seeds of what has become so-called traditions, and then jump all of that and put it as far into the future symbolism as I could to miss out all of the stuff that is now in between the source and the future, and try and keep it a little bit clean in that sense. So at least I knew where the words were coming from, where the symbols were coming from, what they meant. And I hope readers of the deck find that as well. So thanks a lot for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the second part, where we're going to take the tower to the cross. Already you can see a sort of story in there, and I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, as ever, the worker is hidden in the workshop.